Welcome back to Law and Crypto. My name is William Krause. I'm an attorney focusing on litigation, governmental investigations, and other disputes related to digital assets and blockchain technology. So last Friday, we saw a number of reports and statements come out regarding crypto policy from the executive branch and a handful of its agencies. Specifically, we saw three reports from the Treasury Department, one from the Department of Justice, one from the White House Office of Science and Technology Policy, one from the Department of Commerce, and the White House also issued a sort of quote framework for responsible development of digital assets. We also got an announcement from the DOJ that they were launching a digital asset coordinator network led by the department's National Cryptocurrency Enforcement Team, which had previously been established, NCET, that's composed of federal prosecutors that will sort of act as subject matter experts on digital assets for prosecutions and other sort of regulatory or enforcement actions. So I'm not going to break down each and every one of these reports. No, I thought, I might do that in a client alert or some other sort of written article for my firm. But instead today, I would go and provide sort of a quick macro level overview of all this, including some discussion on where we are almost exactly 6 months after the Biden EO. So before I dive into all that, as I do every time, this is your 12th reminder that while I'm a lawyer, I'm not your lawyer. So nothing I say should be taken as legal advice regarding your specific legal situation or investment advice of any sort. I also need to make clear that everything I say is my personal opinion and not necessarily the opinion of my law firm. My comments are being offered for entertainment and discussion purposes only. This also could be considered attorney advertising in some states. So you all know by now that if you want to reach me, feel free to look me up, contact me on Twitter or on my firm's website. My firm is Butzel, Butzel. All right, so let's dive in. Just 6 months ago, on March 9th, President Biden announced, or issued rather, this executive order on ensuring responsible development of digital assets. And that was sort of the subject of my first episode here and represented really a first of its kind whole of government approach to regulating cryptocurrency, really setting forth 6 key priorities for US cryptocurrency policy. So I'll walk them real quick. Consumer and investor protection, financial stability, illicit finance, US leadership in the global financial system and economic competitiveness, financial inclusion, and responsible innovation. Now, if this is jogging your memory, you might also remember that while the executive order did not really create any new regulation, it directed numerous federal agencies to study and report on various aspects of digital assets. I mean, there's something like 21 reports or so that have been ordered in total. And it's sort of working more generally towards a coordinated strategy regarding the regulation of this technology. The idea being that we would issue sort of requests for reports or other sort of analysis to pretty much every federal agency that touched on crypto. And the hope would be, like I said, we would use this to develop a coordinated whole government approach. And generally speaking, the executive order was viewed by many observers, myself included, as being pro-crypto. The Biden administration sort of recognized the U.S. has an interest in remaining at the forefront of responsible development and design of digital assets and setting standards that promote democratic values, the rule of law, privacy, the protection of consumers, investors, and businesses, interoperability with digital platforms, legacy architecture, That's a quote. So the executive order further recognized that the United States derives significant economic and national security benefits from the central role that the US dollar and the United States financial institutions and markets play in the global financial system, and recognizing the real significance of the digital asset marketplace, suggesting that US leadership in the digital asset space was necessary to sustain US financial power and promote US economic interests. At the time, you can tell from the language I've excerpted here, I viewed the Biden as a net positive, right? Basically saying, yes, there's some risks, there's some issues, which is fair, right? But that the US really want to be setting the tone and setting international policy for crypto. At the same time, they want to build a regulatory system that's attractive to investment, right? So you're not having people sort of, forum shopping, looking for more favorable jurisdictions like they do now. But instead, they're going to come to the US because the US, has basically captured the crypto market, has workable regulation, and people want to build here. So do we actually get that? Well, that was March 2022. And, as you all who've been in the space know, we were in a very, very different spot back then, right? I mean, that was before we got Luna and then Terra USD. It's before firms announced they had no exposure to either, but actually did, before prices dropped, and we got hiring freezes and layoffs and arrest warrants and Celsius, and everyone had liquidity pressure and steady lads. But perhaps first of all, we got 3AC, which led to Voyager and Elon sold and sailors being investigated, and all the commercials are now gone. So that's kind of a lot. That sounds like it's something like, of a Billy Joel song, updated version of Weed and Start the Fire, maybe, if I'm not dating myself too terribly with that reference. But that was 6 months between the Biden EO and today. So I think that's important, and I wanted to sort of frame everything against that background, because I think really what's happening in the last 6 months have sort of shaped the direction the administration is going in. And I'm not going to bury the lead here. It's not necessarily for the better. So we discussed the key priorities back in March. And on the one hand, you have things like financial inclusion and responsible innovation. On the other, you have consumer protection, fighting illicit activity, financial stability. What do you think is going to be front and center after the last 6 months? Yeah, so let's just say having the market go sort of full Ponzi at the exact same time the regulators of the world were trying to figure out regulation was unfortunate timing. I mean, don't get me wrong, I believe in this technology, and I think there's a lot of phenomenal people in the industry. But to make a bad analogy, you essentially had, like, imagine the family car, right, being loaned out for the first time to the teenager. They just got those keys on Saturday night and make this good decision, son. They then crash into the judge's car while doing donuts in front of the police station. That's essentially my macro view of what has happened last 6 months in terms of crypto, market, and regulation. So with that ranting out of the way, let's talk a little bit about these reports. I'm not going to go through them. We'll discuss a few quick snippets. First, we have the DOJ report, and I will bring it up on my screen so you can see what this looks like. All right, here we go. All right, so you should see that right now. This is the, sort of the report of the Attorney General, and basically says pursuant to the Biden EO, which is Executive Order 14067, the role of law enforcement, generally speaking, this document was intended to serve as an update to something that came out in October 2020 under the Trump Department of Justice, and that was called the Cryptocurrency Enforcement Framework. Now, I actually was hoping when I popped this thing open on Friday that it was going to be a little more sort of nuanced, right, and a little less focusing on the grave and terrible risks of illicit activity in crypto. I think that's probably a little naive. That was the tone from the 2021, in my opinion, and I think this is just more of the same. And to be fair, this is law enforcement, right? So you're not expecting to see them talking about the promise of digital assets and blockchain technology for the world. But I mean, this is just chock full of everything that's wrong in the industry, and again, not surprising given the speaker, but really indicating that the markets are rife with illicit activity. The threat is growing with the technology, particularly with DeFi, and that law enforcement needs greater resources and broader statutes, or at least that's what they're asking for here. And, I'll just skim the table of contents. I mean, it really sort of talks about, first and foremost, boom, criminal exploitation of digital assets, and talks about DeFi and mentioned that's something new here that they're worried about. And then sort of just talks here about what all the different agencies do with regard to law enforcement. And then finally, this is the part that's kind of interesting. It's talking about these sort of proposals, right? And what they think they would support is, I think, the way they put it. In terms of legislation, rules, and regulations around crypto. And I mean, something that's pretty interesting. We're seeing things like supporting, expanded asset forfeiture, greater ability to prosecute cases that span multiple jurisdictions, greater penalties for money transmission violations, clarifying that they cover peer-to-peer transactions, or platforms. They would talk about things like expanding statutes of limitations, so basically the time that there is to, sort of take action on a violation, given the complexity of crypto, and trying to sort of, uncover what's actually happened. And it's interesting stuff about clarifying or asking to clarify that NFT platforms are also subject to AML/CFT requirements and suspicious activity reporting under the BSA. So if that's not enough acronyms for you, it's basically saying that the Bank Secrecy Act, traditional financial institutions have long had reporting requirements, right, of suspicious activities, or SARs, that they've had to do. And they're saying NFT providers or NFT exchanges should basically do the same thing, in so much as, not surprisingly, folks are using NFTs, from time to time to launder money. It's also interesting asking for more money for blockchain analytic tools and, technical infrastructure for what they deem to be sort of heavy, data intensive investigations. And they also, are talking about coordination amongst agencies and personnel with experience in crypto. You see that with that DAC I referenced, that sort of network for coordinating federal prosecutors. And it's worth remembering that the DOJ doesn't make law or regulation, right? They just have to enforce the law and regulation as it comes to them. So, supporting some of these things and these ideas doesn't necessarily mean it'll come to pass. But, I think it speaks to sort of broader tones here. Namely that law enforcement seems to think they're somewhat under-equipped, at least somewhat under-equipped, to deal with a huge and growing threat within the crypto markets. So, on that happy note, let's pivot to the White House, right? And, you thought, hey, Biden came out in March and there's some really positive sort of, we choose to go to the moon language, and no pun intended there, like crypto moon versus Kennedy's, we choose to go to the moon. But, it was sort of aspirational and seemed to suggest that, we saw this as this great opportunity for American leadership and staying relevant in sort of global financial markets that are increasingly adopting digital assets. And do we get that here? I don't know. So I'm going to scroll down. What do we have first? And, I'm a big believer in sort of seeing, what arguments come up first. You always tend to lead with the points you want to make strongest. Boom, protecting consumers, investors, and businesses. The reports encourage regulators like the SEC and CFTC, consistent with their mandates, to aggressively pursue investigations and enforcement actions against unlawful practices in the digital asset space. I don't know why I'm getting this giant highlighting here or this cursor like that, but basically saying the FTC and the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau should redouble efforts to monitor consumer complaints and enforce against unfair, deceptive, or abusive practices. Talking about these other reports, address current and emergent risks, and then sort of other standards here, promoting access to safe, affordable financial services, fostering financial stability. And then sort of now down near the bottom, we get back to the innovation part that I was all sort of, hyped up about. And then near the very bottom, reinforcing global leadership and, this fighting illicit finance, sort of thrown back in. And then you've got this exploring US CBDC stuff, which is kind of crazy. I'm not going to get into that. Essentially says we want to keep studying it, but we don't really feel strongly about it. I think that sort of reflects, very, very strong tension that I think you're seeing in Washington among folks who are concerned about the privacy implications, not really wanting to go down the same road that China has gone down with regard to sort of the financial controls and the surveillance that is possible through their CBDC. But anyway, I'm kind of jumping around. I think the broader point that I want to make here is that you're sort of seeing things kind of flipped a little bit. The risks are up front, right? Like the innovation, things like that are a little bit less central than they were before. And I think that's important because I think it speaks sort of to, the effects that the last 6 months in the market have had on the executive branch, right? Who was seemingly pro-crypto back in March, seems to be a little more aware of the risks and a little sort of less idealistic now. But what's needed here, and this is sort of the unfortunate part, is because none of this really gives that much clarity, right? If you've been listening to these shows, you know that there's a turf war going on right now between the CFTC and the SEC regarding jurisdiction over the crypto market. We don't get any clarity there, right? Or any of these reports as to who should be doing what in terms of securities, commodities, how should we be classifying securities? That's still sort of very much up in the air. And someone would say kicking the can down the road a little bit. At all times, the Biden EO was intended to sort of just be a request for reports and guidance and study and coordination. But, I think, it still is just very much amorphous. And I think that's kind of frustrating to some people. At the same time, we have some documents, and I'll pull up one of them right here. I'm just not taking my screen share down. Here we go. This climate and energy implications of crypto assets in the United States, which some would argue, not really only fails to advance policy, but actually repeats a lot of old data, repeats biased arguments, and, really seems to turn its back on the private sector, in terms of feedback and really looking to some of the really cool stuff that people are doing right now in the industry to sort of reduce the energy footprint around crypto. And I'd hoped a lot of that would inform this policy discussion. So if you're interested, I mean, you should take this, give it a look, and then also check out this piece here by Nick Carter. You kind of mark this one up, annotated, if you will, and really sort of dives through. He's much more informed and sort of immersed in the climate aspect of crypto, and sort of rebutting a lot of these arguments. It's kind of fascinating, but it doesn't really, make me feel great that, at least according to this annotated version from Mr. Carter, it appears that there's sort of just a lot of sort of biased, one-sided views being advanced here, right? As opposed to sort of the nuanced discussion we had hoped to see. That, taking a step back, seems to be speaking sort of to the different constituencies and different sort of viewpoints that we're seeing in Washington. Like, if you can remember, a lot of sort of the Democrat party has come out as hesitant, or sort of if not openly skeptical of crypto, in so much as they think we're boiling the oceans and crypto is bad for the environment, and we have to get everything proof of stake, et cetera, et cetera. I don't know if that's a nod to that or what, but that's not the entire debate, if you've been paying attention, and it's much more nuanced. And I think particularly when it comes to climate science, there needs to be, both sides of this argument coming across. So you can check that out as well. So I'm going to take the screenshot. In sum, this is a quote I'm stealing from Kristen Smith of the Blockchain Association. I think that's a great group, and she's a, great observer of this space and frequent speaker there. The general consensus from a lot of industry is that the reports and the summaries from the Biden administration's executive order on digital assets are a missed opportunity to cement U.S. crypto leadership, and I totally agree with that. I think sort of the idealism and the sort of call to action and, establish this great crypto utopia, of course, being a little facetious here, are gone, or sort of, much more reduced as a result of the last couple of months. And I think this is a missed opportunity. I'd also add that not only will this fails to focus on leadership and opportunities here, I think it's overly focused on risk. And, finally, in my opinion, these reports are failing to articulate workable guidance, which is the biggest problem of all, right? How laws and regulation can make things work better, how they can actually answer these questions keep coming up again and again and again, with regard to, is my crypto a security? And if it is, is there nuance to it? How do we approach this analysis? Who's responsible for what? If you want a crypto company to come to the table, what is the SEC going to say? You don't get that. Really, what we're getting here is, sort of a response that I think might indicate the stalemate around crypto legislation, almost saying, okay, we're going to redouble our efforts to enforce the laws that are already on the books, as opposed to actually getting new laws passed, which seems to be somewhat impossible, at least at this point. So, very, very strange, but, to redouble, enforcement and sort of double down on enforcement or regulation by enforcement, rather, as we've discussed in the past, the idea that you will use, enforcement actions from SEC or otherwise to create sort of a new state of play and how the law is interpreted. It's not an ideal scenario, and I'm not the first person who's criticized that. So I'm hesitant to sort of say that that's a great approach here. I think many in the industry would be much happier if we just got some guidance and some regulations that indicated we're thinking about things the right way here. So that is what I got for you today. It's a shorter video, but I wanted to discuss these reports because I think they're significant and how the wind is blowing right now. Suffice it to say, it is a wild time for crypto regulation. As much as anybody can ever just describe regulation as wild, right? Like, every week something's happening here that's sort of changing the state of play. So stay tuned. We'll see what's going on next time I talk to you.